and this is the Destiny Movie Night Hangout. Tonight we are doing It's a Wonderful Life, which is the story of George Bailey and how throughout his life he was in service to a town. Tonight, Yogan is joining me. Hi, Yogan.
Hi, Carrie. Thanks for having me here.
It's a pleasure. Yogan, would you like to start off with a synopsis of the movie?
Sure. I forget the exact date of this movie, but it's like the 1940s or 30s. It's way back, like 70 years in the past from today. And it is a black and white film, and that's just give you some idea. But since all these years, decades, it's always been considered like one of those great films, one of those great old films. And to give an idea for the plot line, so we're gonna probably be talking about a lot of the plot. So if you don't want the movie to be spoiled for you, to go ahead and watch it first before watching the Hangout here, or yeah, I don't know what else to say. So just to explain the plot a bit, so we have some context for the Hangout. So you have the main character George Bailey, and it follows his life. And what is interesting is that in the very beginning of the movie, it opens up with how he's going to be trying to suicide and kill himself, and there's like this angel involved where the angel's going to go help him to stop that suicide. And that's like the opening scene of the movie, and then it goes into his past and history about who he was, so the angel could better understand who he is as a person, so that the angel could support him to see his value or who he is as a person. Because of course, in order to support someone, you need to really know who they are. So then it goes back, and it does, like, in the scene of the movie then progresses throughout his life, more from the beginning, as a child. And as you see throughout his life, you see aspects of him which, let's say, are heroic or brave or trying to do good for other people. And within one point, he ends up making a decision to do what's best for the town and for other people, where he gives up his dream to go out and travel the world and see the world and have that good experience and have that, that experience for himself. And he makes a decision instead to do what's best for the town, to stay in the town, to run his father's business, which is actually business that supports the community members, that the business, as opposed to another business, was actually going to support all the individuals, including those who didn't have so much money, whereas the other business would have not supported everyone, would have supported just a few, and the rest would have been detrimental to them. And it was a service that, in a sense, was necessary service. It wasn't like optional service. In this case, it had to do with loaning money and using money to for a mortgage, for a house, or for a car. So he provided that business, and throughout the years, he went through a lot of struggles, and he eventually found this woman who was meant to be great support for him, and became his wife, and they became married, and together they led this life where they continue with the business, and you see challenge after challenge that they face within that, and as well as success where they were able to support others. And so in a sense, like after all these years, up to this point where he's about to suicide, he has supported a great number of people in the town, and that's like his, let's say, his legacy. He didn't have that personal legacy of, like, let's say, going traveling and having a great life in that sense. And instead, he had like a family with his kids, and he lived there. And that was his life. And then he was faced with this great catastrophe, and I don't see the need to go into that too much. But so he had this great catastrophe, and because of that, he lost faith in everything. He just wanted to give up, and he wanted to, in a sense, like die in the sense for money, for life insurance, so that that money could be used for others as well. And so for me, there's a lot of themes that I would like to talk about from this. And for me personally, that's related to this movie. That's what I'm probably going to be focused on most, because there are some great themes to look at. I'm just going to mention them for others to consider them related to the economy, economics, how businesses are run, about how you affect other people around you, about how um, about the meaning, purpose of life, about looking for help, looking for support, not just isolating yourself. All these are great topics that are explored within the movie. They could each have their own hangout, really.
Yeah, I agree. So we can probably start on like the business model that George Bailey had, where he worked in banking and loans, but it was nothing compared to what it is that we're looking at right now, where everyone is seen as a debt slave or a number, and how George actually saw everyone as individuals, and how he actually had this company and ran it as a level of service to the community so that they wouldn't end up living in these slums. So if you'd like, you can talk about that.
Um, I mean, you basically said the point. Where the point of business, if you're running for profit only, then you're maybe willing to sacrifice other people's livelihood. Like we know with here in the United States, where a lot of loans were given out, which were at such a high interest rate, where anyone who is good with math or numbers could just see that, well, no, you're not gonna be able to pay that off. But of course, there's people out there who aren't aware, don't have the skills, don't have the numbers to actually look at that and see it was a bad decision. And so it was basically a point of taking advantage, um, as opposed to, let's say, in a system where people gave reasonable loans, had reasonable interest rates, not based off of trying to make the most amount of money, but just being what's actually best and with what they can do within what's reasonable. Not being too self-sacrificing, but also not trying to take advantage of the others, but actually what that balance is, where it's really best for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. And it really brought these people together in this town too. Um, they were all in it together, and um, it made an impact on how the community was built and how everyone saw George. But we'll get to that later. So, and we talked about a little bit about this before the chat, and how when you watch movies, that you tend to see the parts of yourself in these movies. Can you go into a little bit about that?
So yeah, I'll just be kind of open with this, because when I was looking at the movie and when I saw the role of the wife, Bailey's George Bailey's wife, that there's a very perception which I can just expect people having, where it's like, oh, well, she's just a typical housewife, she's not really a full character or full person, and it's kind of calling like a sexist point of view. But within that, I mean, that's true, but it's also true for many characters and many stories, where, including this movie, where characters, there's not enough time to open up for all the characters, where to make them like a full person, and it's just not practical within a 2-hour time frame. And so for me, when I look at a movie or read a book about any story, I just try to make that as a metaphor, where each single character is a part of who you are as a person, as opposed to each one being their own person. Because for me, I try to use a story or a book or a movie as a point of self-reflection, as a point of getting to know me through a story, through a character, and seeing how I can self-reflect and see how I'm actually like that in my own life. And it could be, let's say, strengths or weaknesses. It could be positive or negative. It could be things that actually are, let's say, things that support others in my life, or it could be things where I take advantage of others or abuse others, or I support myself in my life, or I take advantage or abuse myself as well. So for me, I know it's easy to, within any movie, to say, okay, well, why is it like this? It's unfair. That's not like real life. And that's true, because no movie or story really is fully real life, and except maybe a documentary. But even many documentaries are just stories or fabrication. That's still telling a certain story. That's still telling someone's good or bad. So even then, like, documentaries still have that. So it's important just to use it. For me, I use it. It's important for me to use it, because otherwise I would take it literally. I would take things, a movie or a story, as facts when it's not. It's a story. It's telling. It's giving like a lesson or a meaning, and that's what I look for. And that's how I use it, as a self-support.
Yeah, I found that cool too when we were talking about doing this hangout and we were discussing what came up for us when we were watching the movie. And one of the points that stood out for me was, um, how the angel comes down and saves George, and how we have the tendency to expect some sort of external influence to move us, or to make changes for us, or to come and save us when things are, really crappy. And you pointed out that, well, you can look at this angel as, you know, something that you can bring back to yourself. You can look at your history. You can look at creative ways that you can problem solve this situation. You can bring that point of the angel back to yourself and develop it for yourself. And I just thought that was just a really fantastic perspective, on the movies. Because generally, when I'm watching a movie, I will look at like the character, like you said, like the housewife, and I'll make these judgment calls about, she doesn't really have much of a role in this whole thing, other than to hold poor George Bailey down in the town. It was her making that wish to keep him there, when if you look at it, she was his stability point. um, she was what supported him to continue to do what he did for these people in this town that made a huge impact on their life. She had an integral role in all of this, and she was his anchor.
Yeah, and that's kind of also for me what, um, that whole point of giving, the whole point of support, that was kind of for me my main lesson within this movie, where with her supporting George Bailey, in the very end of the movie too. That's kind of, you look at it, the details. She was one who sort of brought that support of the town, where the town ended up supporting George Bailey, and it was kind of like almost like a natural thing. Like, of course we would support you. Why didn't you ask sooner? Kind of situation, which I thought was really cool, because I feel like I can relate, and I feel many people can relate to not asking for help or support sooner, and when maybe you eventually do ask for support, people are telling you like, well, why didn't you ask sooner? Of course I'll help you. And I think that's a really cool point, especially maybe movies in general today, or stories today, where they don't tell that story enough. And maybe that's why the story, it's so old, but maybe that's why it's so special, because that's like the main thrust of the movie, the main point of it, where you have a whole town supporting one person. That person was supporting them, and so just it's almost like missing the obvious, where we're here to support each other. That's part of life. That's part of living, and that's something I see, like that was for me, like how I approached people. That I realized that the point of selfishness and being selfless, that's a very interesting dynamic there, where we tend to want things for us, like give me things, and within that, like, of course, you would drive any person away, and of course, maybe not necessarily selfless, but actually, like, being a character, being a person of character, who um, is there to support, to actually add something to life, to actually make life better for everyone. That's something that is of value, and of course, maybe this isn't something that's very easy to understand, but a lot of times, like, we may think or believe or may want to be a person that is this supportive that's there for people, and sometimes we're not. We actually do the opposite of who we think we are, of who we think that we know we should be or think we should be, but we don't actually live it fully. And so for me, like I sort of looked at my definition of what it means to be a friend and friendship, and I saw like different definitions in there, which were selfish, where it was purely like, for example, like when you talk to someone that I've noticed this, but never really seen this really reflected on this. But this movie gave me a chance to reflect on this point where, for example, when you speak to someone, where you can be very selfish what you're saying, where you just want yourself to be heard, you just want to be heard that you're right, you want to be validated within speaking, instead of actually considering others and actually considering um, the moment and the situation, everything, or anything else. You're only because in that moment of only considering yourself, and this is almost like, say, like a habit or a tendency. It's like unconscious in a sense. So it's not necessarily like something to blame or to judge, but just to really understand, to actually to change it. And so for me, that's one point within this movie of like being a friend and friendship, and instantly something like communicating where you really have to investigate points that are selfish, that are just for like an ego point of view, where it's like your personal desires to, let's say, be loved or cared for, or appreciated, where that comes first, where you're going to want to control other people and control the situation to get that. And for me, that movie brought that up, not necessarily because it happened in the movie, but actually the opposite, where how I saw, George Bailey acting, how the people were acting in support, how, that point of, let's say, selflessness, where you're just there to support, or, that's like, for me to realize, okay, well, have I actually lived that myself, where I'm actually being that for another person, where actually I'm there giving, where actually I'm there supporting, that I'm actually living that fully. And for me, I really can't say that. And so I know that that's something that I can learn, something I can change. So yeah.
Yeah, that point of self-interest really came through me really strong too when I was looking at what George was doing, because my immediate response to it was, oh my God, he's really compromising himself, giving up all of his dreams and aspirations, and he's going to have to live with all of this disappointment in his life um, to help these people. Oh my God, how can anyone do this? Um, and then as the movie progressed, and again, as we just saw this huge impact on the lives that this man had, and what their lives would have been like if he didn't give them that. That was a huge point for me, which made me question my starting point as my own self-interest, and why is it that I'm always, or I have always been doing something in with the starting point of how does this benefit me? What can I get out of this for myself? Or if I'm not benefiting from this in some way, then why even bother? Why have a life where, I'm completely miserable? And I, to some extent, I see George went through the same process until the realization of it wasn't all about George. It was about a huge group of people that their lives improved. And when he saw that perspective, everything changed for him. And I can understand that as well, going from that point of self-interest to common interest, which is something that I've been working on a lot with myself too, here at home in my partnership, um, is not worrying so much about what it is that I'm not getting, or what it is that I want to get that I'm not going to get, and trying to think of all these ways that I can get what I, want, instead of, establishing that communication together as a team and working out solutions together. That would work, asking a lot of questions, and taking ownership for the partnership and for myself, and taking responsibility for the points of self-interest that are coming up within me. So I'm not even really sure where I was going with that. But that point of self-interest was a tough one, because essentially we are inside of ourselves and we're alone with ourselves all of the time, so we're only seeing it from that one perspective, that one dimension of self, which leads back into what you were saying, is that we're not alone. We can get support outside of ourselves. We have this tendency where we are alone inside of ourselves. We don't realize that we're all in this together. So with going back to more of the character development and points that can be developed for oneself, in relation to going from that point of self-interest to common interest, how is it that you see that we can take the example of George Bailey, or his wife, and use that to assist us with the redefinition process of becoming those things for ourselves? What's your process with that? Like, how do you do it?
Yeah. So it's the process of living words. So, for example, like the word friendship, how to live the word friendship practically, physically, and have a definition where it supports me to live it in my daily life. Like for example, like I have a definition right now where I can apply it. Where, for example, after watching this movie, I went through an investigation through writing, and I wrote out my current definition of friendship, and all the emotional value that's attached, all the thoughts that are attached, all the history of it, any memories that were relevant, and from there to actually redefine it by seeing, okay, like what can I physically do? What would physically make sense? What is missing from here? What would give? What action would give value to my life and to the lives of others? And so within that, so do its best for all. So considering all aspects are involved, me, others, and the environment, everything that's relevant, which is what's here. So within that, one aspect of friendship I saw was the point of giving, and one moment of giving is simply when you're talking with someone, you have a conversation with someone. I sort of realized that you only have access to what a person says to you, and the same thing that another person has access only to what I say, what I communicate. And so using myself as a mirror, I see how I'm like, what I speak is simply like 1% or so of everything that I am as a person, my whole 100%. And the same thing would go for another person. And so that 1% of access that we have to each other is very important, very vital. And so we need to pay attention and focus on that 1%, and to give as much attention, to give it as much, to really use that as like this little mirror into a person, where it's almost like a really honoring and a really regard and a really I don't know what word, but it's like to really give it your all, give it your full attention, to really be here with what the person's saying, and then from there you respond, because what that person's saying, that is a reflection of who they are. So it's a kind of honoring, recognition, recognizing who they are, so that when you do respond and reply to them, that is what you're holding on to, is what words they spoke, as who they are in this moment. So that's like a practice where I've been applying that, where, for example, if there's a distracting thought, for example, where I'm thinking about something or thinking about what they're saying, to make sure I'm still holding on to what they're saying, to really be here with that. Where, for example, one thought could be like, they said something and I disagree with that, and I want to share my disagreement. I want to say what I actually think is right. But then, within that, I notice there's like a rush or tendency or wanting to say it and speak it and be heard, be told that I'm right. But I see that that's actually not the full picture, where that one disagreement is actually just one part of the moment, where they're speaking more things, and so that one point I'm holding on to isn't really who they are, and also really isn't who I am, because that's just one disagreement I'm having, not who I am as a person as well. So the point would be to let that go and to really continue listening to them as a whole. Then after you listen to everything that they said, then to speak from there, because then you understand more of who they are, where they're coming from, and that's what I need to respond to. Not what I think, or not what I was disagreeing with, not what I was believing, perceiving, but really what is here. And that was a really cool realization, difference between what is in fact here and then what I think is here, or a perception of what's here. Yeah.
Yeah, I've walked similar points with a friendship. And my starting point from the very beginning was wanting to be accepted, which created a lot of consequence that I had to walk through. As I started the process with Desteni and started changing how I relate with people and how I communicate with people, and like how you said, how I listen to them and how I'm present, that point started changing, where it wasn't necessarily anymore from a point of wanting to get something for myself out of the relationship, and more about just being here with them and getting to know them. And as I did that, that 1% that you normally usually get from someone out of conversations and discussions about things, those, that 1% of, their beliefs, their judgments, gossip, all the surface stuff. Once you get to know a person and you are there not from that point of self-interest or being judgmental, that resonates with others. Mm-hmm. And trust is developed between the two of you, or an understanding where you can share things together, and so then you can go beyond the 1%, because when you're in a discussion, their ego's not there as a protection mechanism, with all of that crap that we've built up to protect ourselves from the deeper, from exposing the deeper parts of ourselves to others. And it's really quite cool when this starts to open up, because then you get to looking at your potential together, and you get to start expressing yourselves together, and you start seeing, how when you can look at a person and you can see their potential, but it's like hidden underneath all of this crap. To me, the crap is just As I said, the gossip, the judgment, the personality systems, the beliefs, just random chatter. Um, when you see beyond that, and you see the actual potential of the person, and that potential actually starts to come through because of who you are with them, and you start expressing together. It's quite phenomenal, and it's really enjoyable. So the point that I found a couple years ago, when being with others and understanding others and being as a point of support and um, being equal to them, the point that held me back was judgment. The moment I went into judgment, everything went to hell. No access. Gone. So for me, it was just once I started to, but I think then again, you have to look at this too. It's not really judgment of them, it's judgment of yourself, which is another thing that I had to take on as well, is realizing that the judgments that were coming up weren't necessarily about them at all. It was about me. So I had to sort through my crap, my judgments. And once I did that, and once those no longer influenced me, I was able to be a better friend. I was able to be more present because I wasn't going into my head about these things.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Uh, we're within what's coming up within you. It's a reflection of who you are, and that, I guess, in a way goes back to what I was saying before with me listening to a person, their 1%, that when they do speak, that's a reflection of who they are. And so before, when I was saying that, when I would hear something that I disagree with, that reflected myself, not them. And how I was going to speak, if, for example, if I would have let myself spoke, and this one example would have been like angry or upset or making the statement and being very sure of myself. And that's a reflection of who I am, not them. And the same thing when they speak, it's a reflection of them. So realizing that very basic point, it kind of negates the possibility of blaming them or blaming maybe even yourself. Is just recognizing that, when they're speaking, they're speaking. When you're speaking, you're speaking. And it's just so simple. Um, Reminds me of like physics or science where you physically measure it. Yeah, they're speaking and you're speaking. It's not like they're getting you to do something. It's like there's no power within the word. There's no, like a force you can measure with the air pressure hitting you. It's causing you to do something. So it's really that point of self-responsibility and self where, you are like a whole individual, that what's happening within you is your experience. So it's your responsibility. So yeah, I can relate to that where anything that came up like a judgment or a blame, how at first it appeared like, okay, it's them, they're causing it. I need to change my environment so that I can stop the judgment, I can stop blame, or I can stop what's happening within me by changing the environment outside of me. When of course, after reflecting, actually, say being honest with myself through that investigation, that reflection, it's clear that it was just me and what I was experiencing. Um, so yeah, very basic, simple truth.
Yeah, and like you said when you were referencing the movie and how you can take parts of the movie and bring them back to yourself, it's the same with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They are all parts of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And essentially, if you look back, if you trace it all the way back, we all come from the same place. And that one problem is that we don't recognize ourselves in others.
Yeah.
We don't recognize that, oh, It reminds me of that Aurora Borealis picture. Have you ever seen that where the snake's eating its tail?
Yeah.
It doesn't realize it's its own tail, you know? And so this cycle just keeps going and going and going, you know? So we have to recognize that that's us. And granted, there's a lot of information that's in us, and that's kind of what separates us is the information that we have, where we're born, you know, the education that we have, but that's it. It's all just information, but at the base point, we are the same exact thing. It's just we have been encoded with different information that we can change. As you've, you know, pointed out with the redefinition process, we can completely restructure ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So Yogan, we're going to work on wrapping this up. Is there anything that you would like to add before we go?
No, I think that covers it. The most important points I wanted to share. I definitely
Awesome.
recommend watching the movie. There's other themes you can look into. It's not just that one theme. If I was a different point in my life, there's other things relevant in the movie that would have supported me. So definitely check it out.
Awesome. I'm going to include a link to that blog that you sent me as well, that you wrote up, which is fantastic. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Also, I guess to mention too, because this is like Desteni process, that being like a participant in the course material and taking the course, that's part of what supported me to be able to see these points in these movies, to self-reflect, to actually see myself in the world and try to bring that back to myself.
Yeah, and we have brought up some pretty advanced points today. But there is an intro course that will give you the basics to understand where we're going and why, and the points that we're discussing about, like the whole redefinition process that you described, which is all laid out in the DIP course. And then we've got the free DIP Lite course, which is a really cool, really well-structured introduction to the points that we're talking about today. So I'll include those links as well. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Carrie, for having me here.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.